National Novice 2017 to round 1. Inside government, we have Nobel DAF. Inside opposition, we have Malaya A. My name is Kiru, I'll be a chair, but Naja will be a trainee. So just small house rules, if you have phones or any electronic devices, please keep it in silent or turn it off, which is more preferable. If there is no other problem, on the motion, this house ban all advertising for children's television program. Let's call the Prime Minister to speak on the motion for the house. I'll be timing, by the way. I'll be clapping. Yeah, I'll be clapping in the first minute and 6 minutes.
I think in a world where children base their happiness based on materialistic things that advertisements provide to you, I think it's time for us to stop allowing corporations to exploit children or prevent them from getting true happiness. Two things, what does state government stand for? We think that these ads targeted to the most vulnerable pockets of society, which are children, harms the ability for them to gain happiness through intrinsic happiness, right? So when our policy, we have two prongs, right? So what happens is that we'll take away all ads from these programs, like Disney Channel or Nickelodeon. We'll make sure that there will no ads be able to screen. But secondly, we will unlicense corporations who allow these advertisements to be screened on their programs. But two questions I'll answer in this debate. One, why is it when you take away the ability to, why is it that you take away the ability for the child to garner happiness with these advertisements? But secondly, how banning this will make the world a much better place. First, let's talk about the nature of advertisements. What are these advertisements directed to? These advertisements are directed to children. When these advertisements are there to manipulate your mindset, right, and to exaggerate on how beneficial a product is, or to exaggerate on how this product will make you make you look cooler or make you feel happier. These are the kind of taglines that advertisements use. That you can only be happy with this product. You will only be seen as cool amongst your friends if you have this product. But second, let's talk about children in general. As children, especially, we are the most vulnerable to this kind of advertisements. I think children are most likely to see and believe. So what happens is that when you have corporations being able to manipulate them to say that this product will make you popular with your friends, this product will make sure that you have more friends in school. We think these are the kind of children who cannot make the check and balances. These are the kind of children who cannot understand what economy is or what the corporations actually do. But we think when parents are a form of check and balances to these children. But what happens is that when you have television programs, the check and balance that parents give doesn't really exist. Because what happens is that you won't turn off the television because it's your favorite cartoon show. Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is on TV. Why would I want to turn off the TV? So these are the kind of ways where advertisements will constantly be seeped into your mind. So you cannot escape from this advertisements. It's much harder for you to escape from a TV program rather than looking at a poster on the street. Because at the very least, right, I think the scale is that you won't be incentivized to turn off TV because your show can be continued anytime. The thing about these advertisements is that they start halfway during your program, right? So we're halfway when I'm watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. Before they're gonna go for the adventure, they will play these advertisements. This is why I would now suddenly not turn off the TV because I wouldn't want to miss what happens in their next adventure. This is why the corporations are able to exploit these children. But what happens is that when you don't have a rational decision because you don't have a rational to tell you whether this product is worth it or this product is something that will benefit you. So now children believe that these taglines are actually true. That you can only attain happiness if you have this product. You can only gain friends if you have this product. What the outcome is that three things. First of all, when you don't have the product, you will obviously feel unhappy. So the thing is, your lifestyle becomes more materialistic. Where if you don't have this product, you are not a happy person. What happens is that we have multiple stakeholders, like poor children who cannot afford these kind of products, will be stigmatized as you are uncool, you're unable to fit in with society because you don't have these products. But secondly, right, what happens is that when you have middle class families whose parents are frugal, right, who have this check and balances where, okay, if I cannot afford this, and if you already have the old PS4, we think that's enough for you, right? So what happens is that you sever the relationship between parents and children because children will want it even more, right? So what happens is that the thing about children is that they're in a toxic environment where their kindergartens or their elementary schools are based upon having friends that you have friends that only believe if you have this product you are cool. What happens is that if I am seen like in secondary school, right, if I'm seen without a handphone or like an iPhone, I'm seen that, oh, I'm not cool enough. I don't have a social life. I'm someone who doesn't. I'm someone who's not cool because I don't have an iPhone, right? But thirdly, right, what about parents who actually have these check and balances to make sure that your child gets the best out of it, right? So then children will start thinking that my parents don't love me because my parents don't want me to look cool around my friends. My parents don't want me to have that happiness that the advertisement shows. So you'll be less grateful. Children are more likely to be less grateful with the items they have in life. You're less grateful that you're able to go to school and have an iPhone, right, in general. Back then, when the iPhone 3GS came out, I was considered, it was revolutionary that I had one. But then now when the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6 came out, more children started to believe if I don't have it, I'm not good enough. And if I had this iPhone 3GS, I'll be considered, I wouldn't be grateful for the things I have. So this we think is the mentality we don't want children to have. But before we move on, sure.
As a comparison, children are far less swayed to advertisements on TV as compared to the advertisements that the exposure they get on social media. You have to defend why that exposure is fine.
We already told you that we're against advertisements. It's principally against advertisements targeted children. But specifically why television programs are the hardest one to escape. It's because we didn't explain to you why children wouldn't turn off that television program. So the skill is that on our side, right, we take away the biggest factor of children that are buying into advertisements. But secondly, let's look at the second part of the debate. How our world is much better. Because let's look at it, right? Let's look at it in a scale where, at least on our side, right, we have children are less likely to success to these manipulative advertisements. Because why? Children are more likely to be able to enjoy their cartoons, right? Or like enjoy their shows without the television constantly reminding you that you don't have this product, without the television constantly screening the advertisement that you don't have that product, you aren't a happy child, that you're not cool enough with your friends. We think these are the kind of environments we don't want to put the child in, where he constantly turns on the TV, where he cannot enjoy his TV show, with the advertisement constantly reminding him in his face that he doesn't have that product, or she's not cool enough with her friends, right? But then more often than not, they'll be more unsatisfied with the products they have. We think when you're more unsatisfied with the products you have, you're less likely to enjoy things like going outside to play or like going to make friends. What happens is that your relationship with friends or your environment in school is based upon whether I have this product or not. So if I have a phone, I'm more likely to get more friends. This is the kind of materialistic world we do not want to live in. Because what happens is that now my friends making friends is based upon whether I have a phone or not. Me getting left out within the group of my friends based upon whether I have the latest PS4 or not. These are kind of toxic environments that we put the child through. So what happens is that at least on our world, we provide a world where the children are more likely to be based on like intrinsic, able to enjoy intrinsic things like going outside to play rather than being more materialistic and enjoy things like having small conversations with your friend rather than always constantly begging your parents for the latest product or whatnot. So your child's impression to other friends is not based on your products. So you can be who you are rather than I'm only cool if I have this phone, or I don't have this phone and I'm not considered one of your friends. We think that at least on our side we prevent children from living materialistic lives, and we'd rather have a world where they're able to understand the intrinsic meanings. With that, government partly proposes.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll start the case from side opposition. All right, to start this case from side opposition, let's call the leader of opposition. Cheers.
Mr. Speaker, banning advertisements cannot teach children happiness. We don't agree with government's extensive analysis on how banning sort of advertisements in children's TV programs will somehow teach children the essence of happiness. We would rather say that their side treats children that base and measure their happiness based on material gains. I'll talk to you more about that. But first, that's what we side opposition okay with. We think we are fine with status quo. We're fine with how all sorts of advertisements are being portrayed on TV programs. We are fine with product placement, marketing that is done in on TV programs and advertisements. We are fine and we are okay with that. Okay, but let's look at and we're okay also with advertisements, and we'd rather not ban it. But let's look at side government and Prime Minister's speech, right? Because she tried to tell us that, number one, these advertisements often target the most vulnerable market, which are the children. We think that even if we target children, right, like these children are not the final decision makers in their family. We think that the checks and balances who are their parents who can regulate their children's behavior, and that is why having advertisement is an important measure. Even we would rather live in a world where children are exposed to all sorts of advertisements, to exposed to all sorts of products that are out there in the market, because that then parents are always there to regulate their behavior. We don't think, even if you target children who are vulnerable, that doesn't mean you get them to buy all your material possessions. But her interesting point about how it takes away happiness, right? Like so much analysis about this. We think that even if children do not get the sort of material, we do not get the sort of material gains that are portrayed in advertisements, and they throw tantrums, we are fine with that. We are fine with children throwing tantrums and going against their parents if they do not get something. Because we think that tantrums are something normal, right? Children, we think it doesn't play an important factor. Even if they can't get the latest iPhone, even if they can't get a latest technology hardware, we think that it's fine. Technology gadget, it's fine, because the tantrums are something that are in children. We don't think you take tantrums away when you ban advertisements, because children will still be exposed to social media and all sorts of other surrounding influences. We think that even tantrums in adults are super normal, right? Like are super frequent. We think that an adult usually judges another person based on the body that other people have. An adult judges and compares the person to the cast that other adults have. We think that we don't do anything when we try to ban advertisements, because children, even if they were to throw tantrums and go against their parents, it would be totally fine. We think that we think it's okay. But also, right, from side opposition, we would rather say that we would like to educate children to understand that happiness cannot be something that is material based. Like, you do not get happiness just because your happiness is not restricted just because your parents refuse to give into your demands of a new iPhone. We think that happiness then is a broader measure, a broader spectrum of emotions than what side government is trying to tell you. That just because you don't get something that is advertised on TV and you're sad because your parents can't afford to buy that. We think that's a very limited and extremely narrow-minded, myopic view of happiness. We don't agree with that. We think happiness is far more and consists way more than that. We think also that when you ban advertisements, that doesn't change the fact that your children's rich friends can still afford their phones, which even makes it worse on those children. We don't think banning advertisements then changes everything. If you feel that you're inferior to your friend who owns an iPhone and you can't, then the advertisements doesn't do anything, just because you still feel inferior to your friend who is more able to afford other stuff. But also, right? Yeah. What side government does is that they create children who grow up to be individuals or adults who base their happiness on material possessions. We think that's far, very, very harmful for state government to buy and accept that bullet. But let's talk to you about, number one, the first positive material coming from state opposition, why it's principally fine for advertisements to circulate in the media and to be on television shows, because due to the freedom of speech and the rights of media. We think it's perfectly fine for media, for companies to advertise their products through product placement, because this is how companies are given, and media is given the creative license to advertise and show their products, right? We think that how this is like a fundamental right for like companies, right, to display their products, and you can't inhibit that. You can't inhibit that right of companies to have product placement and advertise their products. We think that this is important due to economic prosperity for the companies, right? When you allow advertisements and how you bring a certain margin of profit for companies, you don't inhibit that because of the things that you're trying to say. We also think that, not yet. We also think that it's important in terms of the consumer choice, right? We think it's fine if your children are exposed to all sorts of products and advertisements, because then they are now exposed and then they are aware of different ranges of options that are available in the market. We think that people can, like, when things are advertised in the media, we think this is where people can debate and use their rationale, whether these certain products are appropriate or not. We think it's important to get children exposed to know what's going on. Yes?
When your advertisement tell you specifically that you all won't be happy when you don't have this product, how are you able to teach the child that they can be happy with
This brings me to my second point, but how checks and balances already exist in status quo. We think that children being exposed to advertisements then just means that parents will do a better job on making sure that if certain ads are unsuitable for my child, then I'll just turn the television off or change the channel, right? We think that government, even if certain advertisements are out there, and even if certain advertisements are not appropriate for children, the government already has checks and balances in its censorship board. If certain advertisements or products are deemed unsuitable for children, we think that government already has censorship board to limit sort of products that are advertised. I think this is where the role of family is extremely important in this debate, where parents then allow children to look at all the products that are advertised on TV, but then that allows for discourse and discussion among children because they are not exposed to the other products that are in the market. Side government doesn't do this. They inhibit children's exposure to other things. They want children to live basically under a rock, right, and not be exposed to all sorts of products that are out there just because their parents can't afford to buy them a particular gadget. We don't want a world that side government lives in. We want a world where companies are free to advertise their products and children are free to see what's being advertised, and then parents come into play and they exercise what sort of duty they have. So, price propose. Thank you.
Thank you, the opposition, to complete this inside government.
A child's life largely revolves around the TV programs that they watch and the amount of exposure that they get from these TV programs. But it's unfortunate that in between these programs, companies exploit children from the advertisements that always target children, especially the vulnerability of these children and the ability for them to say no towards these advertisements in the first place. Several questions are answered in this debate, then I'll move on to my argument. But on to the first question I'll answer in this debate on about how you limit the exposure of a child towards these targeted advertisements. So the contention from opposition towards my PM speech was basically about how banning advertisements on children television programs will not change the way in which children think because they are exposed to social media. So firstly, this debate is about how you limit the exposure for a child. Even if the child has exposure towards social media and Facebook and stuff like that, we think it's important for us to limit the amount of exposure that child has. So if we can limit the amount of exposure they have through not having advertisements on their TV programs, then we'll do it because it limits their exposure. So maybe they access that form of social media. But on to my second level, we reject this. They needed to tell me how a 5-year-old child will have access towards social media and how these children will somehow have constant access towards social media programs such as Facebook, where these advertisements are supposed to be. 3 reasons why that's extremely unlikely under their context. So number 1, a child has more access towards a television program that they watch on a daily basis rather than assuming they have Facebook or any form of social media at the age of 5. But thirdly, the thing is this. So maybe maybe we still have, in our worst case scenario, where these children actually have social media and they're still exposed to it. Why is that better? Why is that better than having both of these avenues and having the child even more vulnerable and allowing companies to exploit this child to both these avenues in the first place. We don't agree that just because they have access, maybe they have access to social media, that we shouldn't have any other effort to limit that form of exposure. But to the second idea that side opposition had, where they wanted to like somehow educate like these children on non-materialistic happiness. So firstly, we didn't see any form of link whatsoever as to why suddenly children, when they watch TV shows that tell them that without these forms of toys or without these forms of products, you're less of a happier child. We didn't see why suddenly these children wouldn't think that way when their parents don't buy them that product. But thirdly, they failed to prove to us why parents can act as a check and balance within this debate. I'll answer these few questions within this second issue. So the first thing is this: we think the argument in which they wanted to make was premised upon parents being there 24/7, watching those TV shows with you and telling you that these are the products that you don't need to be happy. Understanding that that's not possible for parents to always monitor you and tell you that you don't need those products, we don't think it's fair for you to allow children to make that form of check and balance. Here's where my PM's argument was extremely important, when she told you that children are more vulnerable and susceptible towards these advertisements. Because firstly, recognizing that these children are the ones that always buy through targeted advertisements towards them, where advertisements are so colorful and so relatable towards them that they want that form of product. This is extremely harmful for a child, because that child cannot make a check and balance as to whether or not that product is worth buying or whether or not he should own that form of product at all. But before that, sure.
We agree that the child does not have check and balances in her own mind or in his own mind. But we think that this is where the parents come into play. Like they tell the children, we won't buy you these things because of these reasons, and this is how you should act, not that.
Alright, so like I understand that, POI. But here's where you needed to respond to my PM's argument, where she told you that the very point in which the parent has to be that form of check and balance is a horrible thing for the child in and of itself. So like there's two outcomes to their parents being check and balance, where number one, you get to buy that product. But number two, let's talk about the kids that don't get that form of product because their parents are the check and balance. This is what also my PM told you. But number one, this is extremely important because number one, the child is more likely to internalize that form of reaction from their parents when their parents tell them no and they reject the idea of buying that product. Why is it so bad that that child internalizes it? Because the immediate reaction for a child to not be able to receive a certain product because of an advertisement is his immediate reaction is that his parents don't love him. That form of emotional harm in and of itself is horrible. But secondly, why is it true that that these children are more likely to jump to that form of conclusion in the first place? Because firstly, the comparative that goes through a child's mind is not like, oh, my parents don't want to buy me this because they know it's not good for me, but it's more of my parents don't want to give me this, that's why it equals to my parents not loving me enough, or my parents being unwilling to buy these forms of products for me. But secondly, when the child goes to school and does not have the product, when other rich individuals and rich children have that form of products, how does that child feel then? We think it's extremely horrible that you would allow that child to feel lesser of a person within their social group when they don't have that form of product in the first place, and especially because their parents are unwilling to buy those products for them. But secondly, this very funny argument that will also be integrated here, where this comparative came up with the rights of the company to have like economic development. So firstly, we think the comparative needs to be made as to whether or not you would prioritize the rights of a company to have economic progression or the vulnerability of a child who cannot make such check and balances within his own mind at that extremely young age. But secondly, this thing that came up from side of opposition, where they want to tell you that that child can somehow make a debate in their mind where they can like decide whether or not that product is extremely worth it or not. So on the first level, we'll tell you that's not going to happen. Number one, the point in which that child has to make the decision, you assume that child would not want that product in the first place, and you assume that that child will have pros and cons in that child's head. We don't think it's safe for us to assume that the child can suddenly have an internal debate. That's why we have to protect children from these forms of advertisements and these forms of advertising at an extremely young age, understanding that the final decision is up to the parents, but the very point in which that child feels neglected because their parents are unwilling to buy that product, that's the point in which we have to understand that we have to step in and help this child.
Yeah. Thank you, BPM. Yellow.
Two things that I'll talk to you in today's debate. Number one, why is it principally wrong for government to ban this? And number two, what exactly is the process of growing up in children? Before I go on to my points, a few responses. The whole idea of happiness will be integrated into the process of growing up. But other responses. Firstly, social media. They say, this debate today is not about the harms that social media can give. We just want to limit the harms and whatsoever. But we will prove to you that the harms are so insignificant, ladies and gentlemen, that there's really no reason to harm it, right? Now, they wanted to talk about how at the age of 5, your child watches more TV than social media, right? I don't know what age they're living in, but it's the digital age, right? Everybody watches YouTube, right? Everybody watches your social media. They don't watch television anymore. And even if they do watch television, once again, we'll prove to you that the harms are very, very insignificant. Moving on. Let's talk about their harms, right? Number one, they wanted to talk about how your check and balances cannot exist under our side because your parents have to be there 24/7. Only then your parents will be able to tell you, oh, this is wrong, this advertisement is wrong. That's not true, right? If your children are so vulnerable and susceptible, your children have to go to your parents to ask them, Mommy, can I buy this color pencil or watercolors, right? So your parents will then act as check and balance. They don't have to be there 24/7. Then your parents will tell you no, right? So 2 outcomes that they highlighted to us. Number one, the children gets to buy them. Sure, good for the children. They got a watercolor. Number 2, that the children don't get to buy them. And then these harms that came out, right? Number 1, that they will be internalizing it. Number 2, that they will have like this intense form of emotional trauma and reaction, right? We tell you that this is not true and unfair for us to defend, right? Emotional trauma occurs when your parents don't feed you and lock you up inside a room, right? Emotional trauma doesn't occur when your parents tell you that, no, I cannot buy this watercolor for you, right? We think it's a gross exaggeration under their side to tell us that they will undergo immense emotional trauma, right? If they want to tell us that your children are so vulnerable and susceptible that they cannot internalize anything, then you must also understand that once their parents tell you no, that you're also vulnerable, right? Your parents are probably going to explain to you that, oh, you cannot have this, and then they also probably will they will be okay with it, right? Because they're so vulnerable. They're not going to internalize it and have an exaggerated reaction, right? That's not going to occur. Moving on to my 2 points. Number 1, the process of growing up itself, right? This is where it directly clashes with this is where it directly clashes with their entire happiness point, right? Ladies and gentlemen, children learn fastest when they're children. Then when they're age 5, 6, before 12, right? They pick up languages, music, and behavior the quickest when they're in that age group, right? So what does their side do? When your side bans advertisement, you stop exposure on whatever kind of exposure that you can give them. That means your children now live in a cave, ladies and gentlemen. So when they finally get this sort of advertisements and everything, they will then become materialistic because whatever check and balances that could have occurred under our side didn't occur because you chose to ban this sort of advertisement later. Now, because you ban something, like we tell you that children find the easiest way to find happiness. It doesn't have to be materialistic or in the form of your advertisements, right? So what happens when you ban this sort of thing? Your children now will not know what being said no to means, right? Under our side, you have these advertisements, and sure, your children might get swayed, right? So then they go to their parents and they say, oh, you know what, I want whatever product that they're advertising. Your parents tell you no. they probably explain to you. We assume that these children are slightly, they're not dumb, right? We assume that your children will be able to understand. Even if they cannot understand, they are young. They will slowly realize that it's okay if somebody tells me no, that I cannot have this product, because that's not what happiness really is based about, right? Under your side, you don't allow these children the room to grow. You don't allow these children development. What happens when they finally get exposed to all your materialistic harms that you talk about? That's when your children grow up to become materialistic adults, right? That's when whatever car that they see outside there, they will start thinking, oh, I need that car. Only then I will become happy. Why? Because when they were children, you didn't allow them to realize that happiness isn't all materialistic. You didn't allow their parents to tell them that no, no means no, and you don't need this. You can go and play with something else. No, thank you. I'll take you when I want to. Now, they told their POI. POI came out from their side. They say if your advertisement explicitly tells you that if you don't have this product, you're going to be unhappy, how will the children become happy? We'll explain the process to you. You'll probably throw a few tantrums. You'll go to your parents, and then your parents will deny you. You will ask why. Your parents will explain. And even if you don't ask later, even if you don't ask why, sooner or later, when you grow up slightly more, you will realize. But under their side, that doesn't happen, right? Under your world, children are ignorant to materialistic harms that you want to highlight. Under our world, children realize, because, yeah, like you talked about it, right? Like some children simply won't be able to afford it. So when they cannot afford it, they'll realize this is not what happiness is about. That's when you allow them to self-actualize before it's good.
Tell me why children will suddenly be willing to listen to parents lecture them about why they don't deserve a product when
even if they are not willing to listen to the lecture from their parents, they're still not going to get the product. Sooner or later, they're going to realize that it's fine if I don't get the product. We tell you, like, you have to be neutral. We tell you that you cannot exaggerate the harms that come under your side, right? Even if your children don't get it, they're probably going to forget about it in 10, 15 minutes, because your children are so vulnerable according to your side, right? And even if they keep asking for it in 5, 10 days, when your parents tell you no, sooner or later they have to realize that this is not what I want, or this is not what I need. Like you said, right? Children changes their mind like 10 times a day. Like, it doesn't happen, like the harms that you highlight don't happen. Now, why is it principally wrong for government to ban this? We tell you that government can only ban something when it's physically third-party harm or explicit self-harm, right? Something that doesn't happen. So it's wrong for government to come up and ban this. They need to tell us why their harms are so bad. And we've already told you that their harms are really, really insignificant. They're children, for God's sakes. And therefore, we take this debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Yelko, to end the substantive portion to sign government. Government. Okay.
When a child watches a television program, and there's constant subliminal messages that tells you that you will only be happy when you have display though, or you'll only be happy because when you have a particular product. Then this is when children are less likely able to make the calculative analysis to whether or not this product is actually necessary. But even if their parents were to tell them that it's unnecessary, we think that because of the constant and non-stop subliminal messages sent by those television programs, we think that is when the child is less likely to be with the parents, because there's a constant subliminal messages that come from those advertisements, and there's a constant perpetuation of that ideology within those schools because of the way the television programs has painted it to be. I have two issues in my speech today. Number one, about the checks and balances, and number two, about whether or not it's beneficial for the child to have the advertisements on those TV programs. But before that, let's point out a few problems that are side opposition. We think that there are two main problems. Number one, we think that they were being very convenient in their debate, but they told us that, yeah, there will be parents that, they told us that children won't even watch these television programs. If it's true that children won't even watch the television programs, then what is then the debate? Then there's no necessary necessity for us to ban it. There's no necessity for us to even have it, right? Because then the benefits that you also wanted to tell us will not also accrue under your side of the house. We think that they're being very convenient. And secondly, we think about the principal thing about this, right? Because they wanted to tell us that in principle there's only self-harm and third-party harm. We think that is untrue. We think that in many cases we already have certain ways, we already do things in order to protect children. For example, we will have parents to sign parent consent forms for certain things that children do. So for example, if they want to go on a school field trip, we'll always have the parent sign a consent form in order for the child to go for a field trip. We'll always have parents that have more control over the child. We'll always ban smoking because we think the child is unable to make the calculative analysis to whether or not they want to risk their lives when they smoke and things like that. We think that these are the types of things we already do, hence taking down the argument of principle. But let's look at my two issues in this debate. Number one, about whether or not it's beneficial. Because we need, whether or not about the checks and balances in this debate, right? Because we think there was a huge contradiction under their side of the house when they told you, yeah, we think that parents should be able to turn off the TV when the child is watching the advertisement. If they do concede that the parents should turn off the TV when the advertisement comes up, they also agree to all the harms that exist under our side. Because they agree that the parents, once the television, those advertisements comes out on the TV, they agree that the parents should turn it off, hence agreeing to all the harms on our side. When they agree to this, they also agree that all the benefits they wanted to accrue will not exist, and then hence there's no need for this no need for these advertisements to exist on those television programs. But let's look at the other things they wanted to tell us, right? Because they told us that these checks and balances will not allow the child to have certain products that they don't necessarily need. But then we need to understand that even though the child doesn't need the product, the child feels like the child needs the product. So the point at which you say no to the child is also equivalent to saying no to the child being able to have food. Because to that child, the way the television has portrayed it to the child, to make the child feel like if they don't have that particular product, it's equivalent to not having food on the table. It's equivalent to not having happiness that they should have in status quo. We think that these are the types of things that the television does put into the child's mind. So hence, we think those checks and balances only makes the child, with the relationship between the child and the parents, worse. So even if it's true that they say we're being too extreme, that the child will internalize that hate, I'll explain to you then why that is not true, why it's not too extreme, and secondly, but even if it's extreme, why is it still worse under their paradigm? We think that when the reason why this is true is because when children don't feel like they're having food on the table, in which the television portrays to them as these certain products as equivalent to food, as equivalent to and necessary, then that is when the child feels like the parents don't understand them, don't understand the fact that the reason why they're being bullied in school is because they don't have that product. The reason why people don't see them as the same is because they don't have that particular product. We do agree that it's true that this still exists without advertisement. We think on a scale it's less. We think that children are less likely to believe, which came out in my PM and totally ignored in their speeches. It's true that when the televisions don't advertise as much, we think that is when children are less likely to feel that it's necessary, because there's no over-emphasis on the idea that that product is necessary. We think that when children are able to place their own values on that product, rather than the television telling you that to place your value on that product, then the child is better able to rationalize whether or not the product is important to them. So we think that is when so we also think that is when even if that is too extreme, and even if that doesn't happen, we think that children are more likely to feel ungrateful for things, right? Which came out in Anna's speech, we totally ignored. So let's revisit it, right? Revisit her argument. Because when children feel ungrateful, that is when the little things that the parents do are seen as nothing to the child, because the child cannot see that their parents actually appreciate them, and because they feel that because my parents don't want to give me certain things, they feel even more ungrateful. These are types of harms that they needed to defend under their house. But let's look at my second issue on whether or not it's beneficial, because they told us three things. They wanted to tell us that so the child is able to learn from it, right? Because when the parents say no to them, explain to them why it's not necessary, the child is able to rationalize. We do not think that is true. When there is a constant subliminal message from the television to the child, and when the television who they look up to, like for example, when they have a princess tell you that you need a particular product, where have the Mickey Mouse tell you that product is necessary, we think that is when they're more likely to believe that Mickey Mouse rather than your parents, because at that point in time, when they're watching that video, the heroes of their stories, the heroes of the stories are the people who should look up the most. We think they're less likely to believe in your parents compared to the TV. But we think that in comparison, so even if parents were to say that, we think that it's marginal, right? Then only a few parents would tell their child, would see the necessity in explaining their child whether or not that product is necessary. More often than not, when I tell my mom that I want that iPhone 5S, she tells me that you don't need it. She doesn't give me explanation why I don't need it. She says, you already have your old iPhone. She doesn't explain why the bullies in school bullying me for not having that particular product is okay. It's justifiable to why I shouldn't have that product. But then these are the types of things that don't happen on their side. So in comparatively, when those advertisements don't even exist in the first place, then that is when the child is less likely to want that product, less likely to have a desire for that product, more able to decide on whether or not that product is necessary for them. So we think that the idea of having more options is also not very necessary, right? Because we really think that the child should be able to make the value on whether or not that product is more important to them or not. With all those reasons, I proudly propose.
Thank you, Gavin. To end this standard portion of this debate, our is.
Mr. Speaker, to grow a child under a rock is to condemn its future. Now, in today's debate, we've seen the government paint a horrible picture. We think that it's not only unfair, we think that it is unrealistic. We think that it is a complete slippery slope where there are absence of logical links. Right? For example, one of them would be how children would bully each other because they have different types of phones, or because not everyone has the iPhone, right? How many of you in this room has the iPhone? How many of you don't have? How many of you have actually been bullied throughout your life just because of a phone, because not having something, right? We think that these kind of things are the social narratives that they're trying to approach, and we think that even if it doesn't exist, but even if it exists, right, we think that there's already a check and balance within society, within the parents themselves, right? And we think that it becomes the role of the parent. Right? If all of the children in the world, in accordance to their paradigm, is already materialistic, when they bully each other just because you don't have the new iPhone, you don't have Rolex, you don't have H&M clothes, we think that it is then therefore the role of the parents. But before that, let me move on. Let me move on to my first clash. First clash, right? Children's ability to self-affirm in society and self-identify versus the role of family. These are the harms that roles of family. These are the harms that they brought up, right? First, that they feel unhappy, to a severe circumstance where the child is therefore traumatized, and that they internalize that the parents don't want to buy things for them because the parents don't love them. We think this is not true. Even if it was true, Mr. Speaker, we think that the child would move on after a week later, right? We don't think this is a permanent form of internalization where the parents, because they don't buy things for you, they hate you, they don't love you. We think that love is something that's substantive, with substantive interpretation, and it cannot be debated. Love, the definition of it, cannot be portrayed and pushed upon side opposition to defend. Before that, defend your case.
Would you then be okay with a child thinking that the relationship with my parents is based on whether you buy me that product? My happiness is based on whether my parents love me enough to buy me that product.
No, we don't think that's the relationship between a child and a parent. We think how a child and parent's relationship is when the parent is willing to say to you, no, my son, you don't need this phone because you already have your phone. This should be sufficient advice, right? The parents say you don't need to be materialistic, you already have what you need now. So what does that teach the child, right? The child doesn't automatically think that the parents hate them. Maybe the child will think, oh, perhaps my parents are teaching me on how to save money, or parents are teaching me how to appreciate stuff, right? Just because your parents buy everything for you doesn't mean your parents love you, right? That's number one. Number two, we think that the circumstance that they're trying to prove is false, right? Why? Because they're trying to paint a picture that every child is unreasonable. Now, and it's inconsistent, right? It came to us and say that children are inconsistent, that children are irrational. But then they came and tell us that children are able to rationalize and internalize what their parents are. We think that it's principally inconsistent. But also under that, we think that children are made up according to the mindset that the parents place them. We don't think that children are wild and free and are heavily influenced by cartoons, by television, or because we think that the parental institution is still there, right? The core principles that our parents teach you throughout the 18 years of your childhood, that is what matters, not advertisement. We think that education happens anyway. I'll bring that in my third speaker. Secondly, on severe relationships and love, we think there's again a gross exaggeration given up by side government. We think when the parents discipline their children, when the parents educate them, it shows that they love each other, it shows that the parents care, and it shows that the parent has an effort to tell them that something is wrong, they're doing wrong, and they're telling them what's right? Secondly, by second class, right, we see that there's a problem solution mismatch here. Right? The problem that government brought up is that children become materialistic. Right? Children become ungrateful for things that they have. The answer here should not be censorship. The answer here should not be pushing that child under a rock. The answer is education. Why? Because we think that the very reason of childhood is so that when you grow up into adult, you'll be reasonable, you'll be useful to society, that you will be able to function rationally and be to self-internalize things that are relevant to you.
We can have education under ourselves. Why does education have to be exclusive to when you have advertisement?
Miss, all three of your speakers deny the fact that parents are a legitimate check and balance, right? You deny the fact that the parents are able to educate the child and tell the child that something is wrong by saying that you're assuming that the child would feel that the parents hate them. So I'm responding here by saying that education does occur, and the problem here, the solution is not by censorship, but by education, right? So I give you two comparatives now. How the children respond, right? If the children respond negatively and positively, let's take government's case at its best, where the children become hateful, right? Where the children become vengeful, where they hate the parents, where they become materialistic. We think that this is all part of the growth process, right? If you learn that your richer kids in your class can afford better things than you, if you feel unloved at certain points when the parents say something, we think this is the process of growth. The text has been harping on, but ignored by some government, right? We see here that the alternative that they're trying to say is that parents are automatically going to give children whatever they want because there's absence of exposure. Now, we think that the problem isn't fixed, resolved, or mitigated at all by limitation of exposure. Why? Because we think that it's inherent within us to want more things. Therefore, the solution is to educate the child and say, this is the limit of your want, and this is the needs, balance it out in your future. Lastly, we think, on my last clash, right? On which paradigm is the best way that a child should grow? We think, obviously, side opposition. Why? Because we give chance to the child to internalize things, right? To learn and experience the parents saying no to them, to learn and experience hurt and pain emotionally, to learn and experience that, some people just aren't your friends because they compare iPhones and having to you. And these children, when they grow up, they become better individuals, right? They become individuals who are able to socially gauge better. They become individuals who are able to self-identify with society better. Individuals who are able to prioritize their wants and needs better, compared to side government, where they put them under the rock, and when they become adults in the future, as Tess said, they will become irrational adults. Proud to oppose for children.
Thank you, Albert. That marks the end of the substantive portion. We start the reply stage session occupied here.
What are the outcomes that we have proven from side opposition throughout this debate? We think that we've proven 3 things. Number 1, how it's the basic right of companies to advertise and we cannot infringe upon it. Number 2, how government principally cannot ban something like this, and even if, because it, number 1, doesn't harm them, and even if the harms that they wanted to talk about, for example, bullying, for example, low self-esteem, or for example, feeling inadequate, we will argue to, we've already argued to, that all this is a process of growing up. The sooner that we realize that this is part and parcel of life, the sooner that we realize there's always going to be something that we want but we cannot have, the better it will be for us as people, and it will definitely be better for children. We've already told you that as children, the development at that age is very important. Doing the right things for your children at that age is very important. If you let them grow up and then expose them to whatever that you want to expose, we tell you it will be too late for them to develop, it will be too late for them to rationalize. It's easier done when they are young, when their minds are malleable, it's easier for them to understand, and it's easier for you to explain something, and it's easier for them not to be swayed, right? So that means, like, once they grow up, you cannot sway their mindset. But when they're children, you can educate them, you can set their mindset in the right way. Under their side, setting the mindset in the right way doesn't occur. We've also proven to you that happiness occurs better under our side. We've told you how children need to realize that happiness isn't materialistic. Children need to realize that when they are being said no to, that doesn't mean that their happiness is that they now cannot be happy. And when will they realize that? When people say no to them. And when will people say no to them? When will their parents say no to them? Under our side. Under your side, that doesn't occur because you do not expose them to these sort of things. We've told you that whatever benefits that we accrue, namely children's development, namely happiness, is far better than the harms that they accrue under their side. We've already told you how their harms are exaggerated, and even if their harms are not exaggerated, it's something that is important and it's a part of growing up. We think that feeling like you don't have enough is something inevitable. You cannot avoid it, and the faster that you can internalize and rationalize that feeling, the better it will be for you. For all those reasons, side opposition.
Thanks, Occupy, and the last speech of this debate, government.
I personally feel traumatized that that side of the house would tell me that bullying in school and other people looking down on me as a person is a part of growing up. We think it's horrible that that side would condone individuals and they'll tell the child that you being bullied in school and you being looked down upon is something that you have to go through in life and something you have to suck it up because you have to go through that form of life. Several questions I'll answer in this speech, but first let's take a look at several things that opposition tried to tell us. So the main crux of their case and the alternate world that they wanted to live in, where advertisements for children that were targeted at children were still rampant, was when the lectures of parents would suddenly be effective. So we told you on multiple levels that the lectures in which parents give their children are extremely ineffective, and that's the very reason why we needed this debate in the first place. But it's important to note, panel, that throughout all three speakers, we've told you that number one, if your lectures were that effective and if they really worked on the child, then the child wouldn't feel sad at all. That child wouldn't need to throw a tantrum in the first place, and that child wouldn't feel any less bad if that lecture of explaining to your child that you don't need this product to feel happy will suddenly mean a lot to the child, and suddenly the child will have an epiphany. Suddenly you understand that materialism doesn't equal to happiness. We don't think there was any link proven by the side of opposition that these lectures were in any way effective to a child who would somehow understand them. But secondly, they were extremely unwilling to engage with the characterization that my PM gave you, where she told you that these children like TV programs play an extremely large part towards a child. And there's this like really funny argument from LO where they told you about social media, and then after that it suddenly just died out throughout their speakers. So the thing is this, the comparative is having social, like let's assume in their best case scenario where there is advertisement and there is on social media and the accessibility for a child to social media is extremely amazing and somehow it's more than TV, right? So the comparative is only social media advertisements, but compared to social media advertisements, child TV program advertisements, you open more avenue towards a child, and this is harmful for many reasons that we told you, where a child has more access to these kinds of things, and that's extremely bad. So maybe outside the house cannot completely like take out this exposure from a child, but what we do is best deduct the amount of avenue that you have towards these coercive forms of targeted advertisements to children. But the second thing is this, where the whole bench wanted to undermine how a child feels, especially when they don't understand the lectures and like when they didn't even want to compare these forms of things. We saw no logical link as to why suddenly this principal argument that came out where you had the companies had rights to like advertise to children, even though the children are extremely vulnerable. So here's the comparative where we've already given you that they refuse to respond from the get-go. So the comparative is, why is it important for us to forego the rights of companies in order to protect our children? Recognizing that the children are extremely vulnerable and susceptible to these kinds of manipulations that the media plays, why is it important for us to forego the forms of like advertisements that they wanted to tell us? That's how the house would protect companies' rights and their rights to manipulate children on the ground. We think it's extremely important for you to protect this child, even if it means putting that child in a cave for a small amount of time when they are a child. We think it's extremely important that we protect this child from as much avenue towards individuals, and it's especially important to protect this child, especially when they don't understand the lectures in which their parents give and they don't believe that their parents are being reasonable.
Thank you all for reply. That marks the end of the speech. That marks the end of the debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands, and proceed to leave the room. Thank you.
Let me press the door first because you can't
Alright.
like open the door.
Alright.
Yeah, I'll start. Sorry.
However, the two government side, I think the law on the state is still not implemented. If that's so, then how is your strong government? I really didn't like it. so late, it's not going to be this one.
And I think if you complete in the last week, I think that it is not late. I don't believe that, but I think it's just a big reason. Like, if you actually not doing it, it doesn't see something. If it happens, then sure, that is fine. Doesn't see something, I think.
I mean, I really like arguing about this rights on community, but it just really didn't. It was just like a one-liner.
He died down, and then, like, because he died down, I'm buying it down. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
I don't care about it. So it's easy.
I thought it could have been a flash.
Yes.
So I wanted to know, but I'm sorry. It's not really anything.
Wait. Have you guys seen Humble? I mean, it's a training site. Have you seen what's Humble? That was
Oh, no.
I'll just call this. Not denied.
Wait, was the live stream on?
What?
Was the live stream on?
All right.
Yeah, I think that